Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we're in our 26th year, I interview writers about their craft. Poets, when we can find them, sometimes prose writers. Even beyond the writing craft, we have other artists on. We've had sculptors and actors and musicians. It's a pretty wide net. So if you have an idea for a guest who might be good for the Writer's Block, poet or novelist or other brand of artist, watch for our address at the end of the program. We'd love to get your suggestions. I want to also mention that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that comes out of Cape Ann TV is a service of public access because of the cable service that you are watching right now. You don't get this wonderful community cable service with Dish, so don't be fooled by those ads when you see them on television. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have a poet, a very accomplished poet from nearby Winchester by the name of Maura Linehan. And I'm going to use the back of her recent book, Incarnate Grace, for the introduction to Maura. After careers as a high school English teacher and an administrator in high-tech and academic settings, Maura Linehan now writes full-time and occasionally leads poetry writing workshops. Her poems have appeared in such journals as Alaska Quarterly, Crab Orchard Review, Image, Notre Dame Review Poetry, Poetry East, Prairie Schooner, and at Northwestern, Tri-Quarterly. Linehan's debut collection, If No Moon, won the 2006 Crab Orchard Series Open Competition and was published in 2007 by Southern Illinois University Press. Maura Linehan, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could come down.
I'm very honored to be here, and I very much appreciate this opportunity to talk about my work. And I want to give a shout out for the Gloucester Writer Center where we met.
Yes, a few months ago.
That's right. When you were, there was a
2015?
Poet Laureate's presentation, and that's when I first heard your work.
Yes, it was very lucky for us both.
Yes. Yes.
I want to mention your book again and show the book, Incarnate Grace, which is available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, area bookstores. The book again is Incarnate Grace, Maura Linehan, and I know that sales will shoot up after the show is broadcast.
Thank you. I hope so.
It's wonderful to have a poet on, and I always lead these interviews asking, why and when did it start?
I started late. I did not write as a child. I didn't write as a teenager, even in college. It was when I was in graduate school. I was taking a course at Simmons in writing poetry. And I did it, actually. I took the class to fill out my schedule. And I also thought that if I was going to be teaching high school English, I should know something about writing poetry. And for the first time in my life, someone told me, you should stay with this. And the professor, Norman Klein, I'm indebted to him, and I've lost track of him also. So I would dearly love to find him.
He's not at Simmons
anymore. No longer. He left shortly after I graduated, and this is quite some time ago. But from there, I taught high school English in Hingham, Massachusetts. 5 people in the department were poets. I mean, it was totally unexpected that you would find, I think, so many poets in one department. And as a group, we worked together. I then started taking classes at the Blacksmith House, Cambridge Adult Education Center. I eventually got an MFA in writing from Vermont College.
So you've been up and down the coast around Boston.
Yes.
Hingham, Gloucester,
yes.
Winchester, not too far from the coast.
Right.
Tell us about this collection, Incarnate Grace. When did it come out and when did you begin it?
The collection was released in April of this year, 2015. The trigger for this collection was that I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2009. My surgeon told me that the margins around my lumpectomy were clean, but not ideal. And I, being confronted with cancer, being told something about the margins that I just couldn't comprehend fully at that time, I went home to my dictionary and looked up the meaning of the word margin, was reminded of how many meanings there are, and I instantly saw that this would be an avenue in a way that I could talk about breast cancer. So from there, the collection has poems that are set on the West Coast at Friday Harbor, and I talk about the margins there. I talk about the margins in the Book of Kells, a manuscript that's dated at approximately 800 AD. And that manuscript, an illuminated manuscript by Irish monks, has fascinated me. Scholars proclaim it perfect because nobody has written in the margins of that manuscript. And then I also had a residency at a very wild place in the southwest of Ireland called the Kilrillig Project. And there's this marvelous woman who had the idea to restore pre-famine cottages there and make it a place for artists, writers, visual artists, poets like myself to come. And it's the end of the world there, but I find it extraordinarily inspirational.
I enjoyed reading poems on both themes, the positions, the places in Ireland, and also the cancer poems, and I love some of the medical jargon, procedures, and not ideal.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Yeah. Can you share with us a poem on the theme of incarnate grace and margins?
Okay. I can start with a poem that I use to alert the reader, one, to my disease, and two, to the theme of margins. And I think you'll hear my surgeon's words repeated again in this poem. Electric. Fine line of my breast cells flush on the brink between breast and right here, hard rope of a scar. Tumor cut from that border, host breast, chest wall, cancer had embroidered the milk glands there. Left with a swollen right breast I don't know, so erect, taut. Fold line, now scar line, which tugs each time I reach with that arm. Ongoing, electric, this fear as I lie in the dark. Margins clean, but not ideal. Echoes of my surgeon's voice.
That's a wonderful poem, and I'm recovering from leukemia myself, as I mentioned to you, a form of cancer, and I resonate with the echoes of fear and anticipation. Not anticipation. That's too positive. But the fear of what is going to come and the unknowing
right.
sense of that.
And that brings up another theme for me in which I'm trying to learn how to live in the present moment. And as John showed the audience, the cover of my book is a map. And I live on a small pond in Winchester, and the publisher, the people at the press were able to find a map that names Winter Pond on it.
I'm gonna.
And it's very small. It might be hard to see.
Yeah, we won't see, but I want to show the cover again, and so that we can see the map. We can come in close on the book once more. There it is.
But
I'll
Winchester
put it-
is at the top.
wi-
Yes.
Winter, the ponds are
Right.
up here.
Yes.
It's a very readable map live. It's not showing up in that kind of detail on the television screen. But the ponds up here that are mentioned in a number of poems, and fishermen on the ponds.
Yes, right.
It was helpful to go back reading the poems and refer to the map on
Yeah.
the on
And
the, on
I
the cover.
became very interested in how did that name Winter Pond get attached to the pond behind my home. And the earliest date that I could find on a map was 1638. And so if you think about, Boston being settled in 1630, already Winter Pond had been named. And because I could find no writing about the selection of that name, I made up a story about how it came to be named. And so that poem,
What page is that?
I'm on page 3, which is the first poem in the collection. Praise him in the temple of the present, though who ever can, the present always unwinding, slipping away, now in yarn, hand-spun and coarse, slips of thatch in the skein, in seed stitch, in slip stitch, cable needle in front, in the back taking shape in ribbing, in body and armholes, already stitches for the neckband slipped onto holders. Soon the warmth in my lap won't be enough this dying afternoon, this season, this hour for which the pond outside my window was named Winter Pond. Yellow-gray glow lowering through the sky, now beneath clouds, now treetops fanned out against the last light. This slippage, this darkening, this now already fled.
Very nice. I love the alliteration that you use. Very, very ancient in feel and tone. I also want to ask you, because you use embroidery in electric, and you mentioned skeins here.
The knitting.
Do you embroider, sew, knit?
I knit. I'm a knitter.
You knit.
Yes. But my mother was a sewer, my mother was a weaver, and so I long looked at someone who was sewing. For a short while in my life, when I first started teaching, I made my own clothes, and then eventually I could graduate to buying them. But the theme of living in the present tense is wonderful. It's very, very hard to stick with that. And I have a poem called Halfway Through Radiation, page 20, where I make a vow that I will live in the present tense, and then you'll see how long I keep that vow. Halfway through radiation. And I have an epigraph. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. And you recognize that, I'm sure, is coming from Thoreau, from Walden. That start again train that brought me to this point, the endless local stops, finding the lump, doctor visit, mammogram, ultrasound, needle biopsy, repeat mammogram, the news. Surgeon visit, MRI, pre-op tests, all the phone calls in between, before the lump, 4 lymph nodes excised. Then back on the train, CT scan, bone scan, oncologist, radiologist, oncotype DX test results, radiation mapping, tattoos, my vow, the first time I lay on this table, Johnny half off, right arm above my head, 3 technicians calling out numbers, red laser beams intersecting on my exposed breast. In those crosshairs of intent, that first time, my vow, old, familiar, from now on I will live this deliberately. Halfway through radiation, though, day 17 on this table, it's already routine. 3:40 stop each afternoon, beams set by the numbers. Mr. Thoreau, tell me, what does it take to keep such a vow?
Yes. If you find out, let me know. I love that idea of trying to be in the present. The latest jargon is mindfulness, which I sort of reject. I prefer paying attention or deliberately. Do you do that every day? Do you try to do that every day?
When I start in the morning, when I go to my desk, I try to be attentive to the fact that writing, I believe, comes through us. I think inspiration is a gift, and I'm praying that I will be receptive to that spirit that comes to us as writers, and sometimes takes vacation.
Yes, long vacation.
Long vacations, yes.
I want to ask you a couple questions about the craft of writing itself. How do you think of, as you use it very effectively, sound techniques, alliteration, internal rhyme, assonance? This seems to me a very, very ancient in tone, your poems, very oral.
I might respond to that by saying when I was a child, I was sickly, and I grew up, we had no TV. My father refused, did not want us having a TV at home when I was very young. And so when I would be in bed, my father would read to me. Now, my father read to me Gerard Manley Hopkins. He read me Dylan Thomas. He read me Aesop's Fables. He read me the Psalms from the Bible. And I mean, I have to say, I had no clue. You know, I still have trouble with Gerard Manley Hopkins. I still have trouble with the Psalms. But I heard, again, my father had a wonderful voice, and I heard rhythms. And I felt them in my body. And so one thing that I try to do is to try to find that experience again when I'm writing, to feel the line, and then to hear it. There's Pete Fairchild, who says in a poem that the poet hears the sound that should come next. And I'm interested in trying to follow sound in my work. And when I'm writing, I also am reading aloud. I'm writing aloud so that I hear what's going on, or I try to hear.
And you want that, you're after that sort of sprung bounce that Hopkins is famous for.
I'm not sure I'm there yet, but am looking for it, yes.
Do you play it in your head as music, or do you sit down and count trochees and dactyls and make sure that it's doing what you think it's doing?
Yeah, there's times when I pay attention to, too many short syllables, or, I am looking for rhythm. I am at times counting syllables, and at times it just gets away from me, so that's a technique that I can use in revision, to tighten things up, to look for a rhythm pattern.
It sounds, your poems read very musically, very, very comforting to my ear.
Thank you.
I like alliteration.
Thank you. Yeah.
I want to ask you another technical question. This is even more removed from the sense of the poems. Do you write every day, and do you have a schedule you try to keep to?
I do have a schedule, and I try to write. I have the imposition of writing 17 hours a week. Or, well, I should back up and say being at my desk 17 hours a week. And so I keep track of time, and it has to be real time devoted to either serious reading, working on a new draft, or revision. I try not to get too busy with the business of poetry. That can come outside of the 17 hours.
Is this 3 hours a day, and then
some days, no,
an
sometimes,
extra hour on
yeah,
Saturday?
some days it's 5 hours, in terms of what I'm doing. Some days it's 1 hour, so it doesn't have to be a particular block, but depending upon what else is going on in my life, I'm trying to count my hours. And if I don't make my 17 hours, I need to make a donation to a food pantry, a monetary donation to a food pantry, to try to keep myself honest with this. I know of people who write when they feel like it, write when the mood strikes. That doesn't work for me.
I don't think that works for
And
anybody in the
I
long
don't
run.
accept that from students, when they say that that's what they need. I try to get them to see the benefit of doing exercises and staying with something.
I agree.
I can move to Ireland if you'd like,
I would.
in a
I
poem.
would like that very much.
Okay, and we can go to the monks who made the Book of Kells,
Oh, yes.
on page 35. And this is a manuscript of the four Gospels. Again, as I said earlier, by monks about 800 AD. The monks who made the Book of Kells, who were they? The monks who made this book, the scribes and artists, once fishermen and farmers, this son or that a father had given as tithe, the orphans left as infants, as children, who stayed the rest of their lives, and those few suffused with a sense of a calling, men who wore goatskins over their tunics, sandals in the extremes of heat and cold, the rule stressing obedience, order infused throughout the day, when to pray, to work, fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, conversation kept to a minimum, diet as routine, vegetables, peas, beans, a small loaf of bread, milk and butter, beer, those close to the sea, seal meat and fish. Scholars able to say 4 such men copied these Gospels, hand A, B, C, D, they call them, making the part suffice for the whole. Who were they, if the rule had to remind them to read what they wrote? Yes, errors in the text passed down book to book. What's the fission? What's the fusion that explains such abundance amidst the austere? 2,000 initial letters enlarged and colored, then embellished with flourishes of tendrils and spirals, interlacing knots, serpents undulating around and through. Not one design in this book repeated.
Now, if I had planned better, I would have gotten a graphic of the Book of Kells because it is so beautiful and so spectacularly colorful, and coming out of what is very correctly in many ways called the Dark Ages. It's really phenomenal.
Yes.
So it's a wonderful poem.
Thank
I want to make sure we get at least one more poem, and we have only about 3 minutes left. So I wonder if you could pick one.
Okay. I'll pick one. This one is called Ferry on page 32. And this one is set on the West Coast at Friday Harbor. And I'm watching this gigantic ferry come in regularly. The day's last ferry slipping out for the mainland, each window on its many decks lit before me, a Frank Lloyd Wright design, clean line, stained glass upon the nighttime waters, barely moving this ferry, its reflection, and I'm held on shore at a window. In 6 days I'll walk back into its hungry mouth. In sunlight's glare, that ferry's mouth blacker than the woods tonight behind me. Beyond the harbor, the ancient boatman's rowing, rowing since the world began, coming toward me in his open dinghy. Ferrymen for what will be my passing. The island's ferries passed, or Charon's already claimed me as his passenger. So slowly do we glide, I don't even know I'm on board.
Wonderful.
Thank you, John.
Scary Ferry.
Yes.
I want to know, two final questions. When's the next book coming out? What are you planning right now?
Not too much pressure. I'm working on a collection about my grandmother, my mother's mother. She was a dressmaker in Paris in 1900. And so I've been reading about and researching the fashion industry at the end of the 1800s. But I'm also looking at the art that my grandmother might have seen, could have seen in Paris, because my mother became an artist, a visual artist. And so I'm trying to think about how my mother, with all the, and again, my grandfather was a tailor, with all this emphasis on making clothing, how my mother became a painter.
So, in the 1900 in Paris, an exciting time.
Oh, yes. I might have to go to Paris.
It's a wonderful city.
Yes.
Wonderful, walkable city.
Yes.
I'm going to have to break it off now. We have less than a minute. Moira Linehan, I want to thank you very much for coming down and being on the Writer's Block tonight.
Thank you.
I enjoyed your poetry. I know our audience did out there in Essex, Rockport, Manchester, and Gloucester. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you watching in television land, too, for watching the Writer's Block this evening. If you've learned something about poetry this evening, about recovering and dealing with illness, being in the present, or Ireland, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.